arrest for alien smuggling?
This man is a coyote, a smuggler of human beings. People like these, poverty-stricken Mexicans, part of the estimated 2 million illegal aliens who each year try to move up to America.
Here is the only place on the earth where you have a large, underdeveloped country, very poor country with a rapidly exploding population, sharing a very long land border with a large, overdeveloped country that at the moment does not have a very rapid population growth.
Fact is that we were here. We were here long before, the 13 states decided to get together and call themselves the United States of America. We were in this, what is now this country.
Hola, soy Chichi Rodríguez. Voy a responder al censo el 1 de abril.
I think the 1980 census is important for Hispanics because for the first time, we're going to actually know how many Hispanics are presently living within the continental U.S.
Análisis de temperatura del sexto periodo.
A bilingual schoolroom in Chicago. We may never know exactly how many Hispanics there are here, but we do know this. The American nation is about to go through a time of staggering change.
English, you'll have to look it up in your dictionary.
I'm Arthur Gonzalez. I'm 24 years old. I live here in East Chicago. I will plan to finish my education, try to move up into a better paying job. My plans for the future are to be financially secure by 34.
In general, the Latin Americans,
we're moving up.
We're moving up. And little by little, we have been recognized, and we work hard for it.
We're moving up.
We're moving up.
NBC News presents We're Moving Up, the Hispanic Migration. Reported by Bill McLaughlin.
This NBC White Paper is brought to you by Weyerhaeuser, producers of lumber, plywood, paneling, paper, packaging, and thousands of products made from America's renewable resource, trees. Weyerhaeuser, the tree-growing company.
A gozar, mi hermano, con el sonido de Radio Hit de la primerísima en el 1480 WKIT, formando parte de la vida y el sentir diario de miles y miles en New York.
Hispanic America is exploding, growing 5 times faster than the rest of the population. Today, 3 great American towns move to different Latin beats. In New York, the sound is Puerto Riqueño. New York has the largest Hispanic population in the country, almost 2 million, more than half Puerto Ricans. The American Commonwealth of Puerto Rico has a population of 3.4 million. As native-born Americans, Puerto Ricans can come and go as they please. In general, they're less well-off than other Hispanics, but many are moving into the middle class and into positions of power in local government. If Puerto Rico becomes the nation's 51st state, their power and influence will increase greatly.
WQBA AM Miami. WQBA es para usted.
In Miami, the sound is Cubano.
En todo tiempo mi son cubano ha sido el rey. Ha sido el rey.
Cubans are not just part of Miami, they are Miami, a voting majority.
Cubano ha sido el rey. Ha sido el rey. Más grande que la Columbia.
The mayor of Miami is Hispanic, and so is most of the city council. As a block, they're the richest Hispanics.
Ha sido el rey. Ha sido el rey.
Many were already members of the middle class in Cuba and came here as political refugees from Castro's communist rule. For the majority of the nation's 800,000 Cubans, Miami is home, but they're beginning to move up the eastern seaboard.
Los Ángeles.
The rhythm of Los Angeles is Chicano, or Mexicano. 1/3 of the nation's Hispanics, at least 4 million people, but probably much more, if illegal aliens were counted, live in California, most in the Los Angeles area. Even though they are mainly Mexican-American, they're still a mixed group. Some are part Indian, which gives them an edge over the claim of Columbus to America. Some are more Spanish and were here before the birth of the American nation. Still others just arrived yesterday, or perhaps today, as illegal immigrants. Their future impact on California is summed up in this one statistic. Half of all the children in kindergarten in Los Angeles are Hispanic. They are all Hispanic Americans, and their presence in America is beginning to be felt in unlikely places and unusual ways.
This is the computer library at the Bureau of the Census. The files are jammed with information. Information about you, about every person who's been counted so far. Next Tuesday, when the Bureau starts counting again, it's expected to come up with some interesting statistics on America's fastest growing minority, the Hispanic Americans.
Hispanics used to live mostly in the Southwest, but they're on the move, financially and geographically. According to the last census, there are 12 million Hispanics legally in the U.S., 60% of them of Mexican origin. But it's estimated that there are about 6 million Hispanics illegally here, for a grand total of some 18 million, at least 2/3 of Mexican origin. Most demographers expect Hispanics will replace blacks as the nation's predominant minority in the 1980s.
Vosotros sois mis amigos. Quiero que os améis los unos.
This is not San Juan, Puerto Rico, or Mexico City.
Al final,
This is Chicago, Illinois, St. Francis of Assisi Church. It's called the Cathedral of the Hispanics.
pronuncia estas palabras.
Chicago has the 3rd largest Hispanic population in the United States. New York is first. Los Angeles is second. 20% of the population of Chicago, 1 out of every 5 people, is Hispanic, sometimes called Latinos. The pastor, Father Jose Gallego, came here from Spain 28 years ago. Of the 3,000 members of his congregation, he estimates that 2/3 are illegal or undocumented immigrants. These are his people.
Una espiga dorada por el sol.
The makeup of our congregation is the most varied one. That is made up of practically every single Hispanic extraction. Mexicans, Guatemalans, Hondureños, as they call them, Salvadoreños, Panameños, Colombianos, and that means from Mexico all the way to Argentina. The largest number of the congregation is definitely from Mexico. Now, these people normally tend to keep their traditions. I think that those traditions from those countries where these immigrants come from can be a tremendous asset to our own country.
Hispanics are no longer simply a folkloric part of the southwestern scene. They're everywhere now, and they're very much a part of the American heartland. Here in the Chicago area alone, there are 1 million Hispanics. In Pilsen, what used to be a Slavic community is now like a slice of Mexico. This is the first stop for the illegal Mexican immigrants. This is where they start off in their effort to move up.
One of the traditions they bring with them is music. This record store sold $2 million worth of Hispanic records last year.
As Mexican Americans move away from the border, rather than to lose their culture, we actually find that they work harder to maintain the customs. I find in places like Chicago or Milwaukee that those communities are extremely Mexican. I'm amazed at the Mexicanism that is still maintained. And it really speaks well, I think, for the tenacity of the cultural values and customs and traditions that people have.
There are 7 Spanish-language newspapers in the Chicago area. This one, La Raza, is the largest, with a weekly circulation of 40,000. Its editor, Fernando Prieto, covers news that will interest the many different Hispanic groups.
New York, for example, is a Puerto Rican country. Miami is not part of the United States of America. It belongs to Cuba. And Los Angeles is completely Mexican. But here in Chicago, it's a beautiful combination of nationalities. I don't say the melting pot because I don't want to melt with anybody. Here is a beautiful mosaic of different nationalities.
Most people don't really recognize the fact that Chicago has literally become a port of entry in the United States. It has a very high proportion of Mexican foreign-born persons, more proportionately than does Texas, for example. It also has a high proportion of persons of Puerto Rican descent, Central South American descent, and right now, perhaps of all the areas in the United States, this is certainly one of the most intriguing.
There's also a Spanish-language television station featuring local news of the Hispanic community, news from Latin and Central America, and programming directly from Mexico. There are more than 40 Spanish-language television outlets in the U.S. Most of them carry the top shows of Televisa, the Mexican TV network. Father Jose Gallego spends much of his time helping illegal immigrants. He's called the Apostle of the Undocumented, a missionary to that American subculture.
¿Quién es esta? María, nombre bonito. ¿Y esta, la princesita? Carmela.
This man is an illegal alien. He was supporting his wife and 10 children, earning $4 an hour, until he was injured at work. He's unemployed and afraid to go on welfare. His oldest daughter was in a car accident and needed an operation that cost $2,000.
Can you sing for me?
The only place they could turn to for help was the church.
A ver, sí, canta para mí, a ver cómo cantas. Yeah, birthday to you too. Eh? How about you with her? Want to sing with her? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
A man with a sense of tremendous responsibility who came to the United States looking for a better life. Meanwhile, they had not been able to pay any of the bills. The rent has not been paid for a month. The electricity has not been paid. The gas has not been paid. I myself don't know really how he's going to manage to make ends meet.
Later that same day, Father Gallego went to meet a group of young, undocumented workers who complained about being exploited at a suburban Chicago food processing plant and who had no one else to turn to.
Estoy seguro de que hay allí un individuo o dos individuos que están buscando. Dice, tú no tienes que tener These boys feel under an enormous amount of psychological stress. One of their fears is that they will be laid off, and that is why they are practically lambs when they are in the factory. Can't raise their voice. They are afraid of making any claim because they're afraid they'll be put in the street. Another fear they have, a very strong fear, is that the owner of the factory, the supervisor, might call the immigration on them, and then they'll be deported.
From the standpoint of labor protections, there's the fact that we've got large numbers of people who are in our country illegally and who live outside the protection of our laws and who are easily exploited. I believe that the presence of large numbers of workers from other countries tends to perpetuate marginal, low-wage jobs in the United States.
The United States reaps many benefits from the presence of workers from Mexico illegally in the United States. One is that these people pay for a vast array of social services that they never receive. They pay income taxes, they pay Social Security taxes, they pay sales taxes and so on, but they don't get the benefits. Another benefit is that we get cheap labor, and that means that homes in Houston or blouses made in Los Angeles and sweatshops and so on are cheaper for Americans to buy.
Most illegals or undocumented workers hold low-paid, unskilled jobs, but they pay billions in taxes and Social Security for benefits most never collect. And aside from economic hardship, they must also cope with prejudice.
One can appreciate the misconceptions about the illegals in a common statement that is often made, namely that, by God, these illegals coming in from Mexico are a bunch of welfare bums, and besides, they're taking jobs away from Americans because they work so hard. Well, you got to make up your mind. Which is it? Are they hard workers or are they welfare bums? It's a little difficult to be both at once. In truth, all the evidence we have indicates that although some Americans lose their jobs to Mexicans, that's a relatively small number, and that actually probably at the moment, and I emphasize at the moment, the Mexican immigrants are a net benefit economically to the United States. That does not mean there are not extremely serious problems associated with that Mexican immigration.
This Mexican folk song, now popular north of the border, expresses the loneliness of the illegal alien. Between hills and mountains is the village where I was born. The memories of mornings I have lived through.
The undocumented brings with him the solitude or loneliness. They still miss their parents, they miss their brothers and sisters, they miss the company of their real friends in the little town or ranchito, whatever. They miss, obviously, if they're married, their wives, their children. This is an enormous stress on them.
Son perennes cancioneros de mi tierra, Tepoztlán.
U.S. agents call it the war zone. In a moment, a busy night on the border.
At one time, man was an occupant of a small segment of Earth. He took what he needed and replaced even less. Sometime along the way, man became a collective force, a mighty mass that influenced all life. Resources that once seemed so vast suddenly appeared limited, even the forest itself. When did it happen? It certainly wasn't true 100 years ago. Timber, to build and fuel the railroads. Timber, to house the great migrant waves from Europe. Timber, America's raw material without end. Or was it? Man's early conservation steps were sincere, even though basic. Companies like Weyerhaeuser began caring about the forest decades before anyone heard the terms industrial waste, water pollution, and smog. This philosophy of scientific reforestation was formalized in June 1941 at Montesano, Washington, by the Weyerhaeuser Timber Company. It was the official beginning of the tree farm movement, a visionary step away from the sawmill philosophy when the focus shifted from cutting trees to growing them, and seedlings became just as important as logs. And thus, almost 40 years ago, Weyerhaeuser took the first practical step toward perpetuating the American forest by growing trees on a sustained yield basis. This is Weyerhaeuser high-yield forestry at work, a plan that will let us grow twice as much wood on the same land, while at the same time managing the forest in harmony with nature. The commercial forest is our largest agricultural crop, requiring tremendous capital investment for the future. Part of a cycle, growing trees, harvesting, manufacturing, marketing, and reinvesting income in the forests of tomorrow. All this is possible for one very simple reason. Trees are renewable. Other resources like oil, coal, or gas are not. Reforestation ensures future generations generous supplies of lumber, plywood, pulp, paper, and thousands of other useful products made from wood and wood fiber. The result? We can boldly predict extraordinary changes in our human estate for one very precious reason: man's inclination to care. To care enough to put our life support systems into accord with the laws of nature. Good news for a young America in a resource-short world. From Weyerhaeuser, the tree-growing company.
We're moving up. The Hispanic migration continues.
The U.S. port of entry at San Ysidro, California, is one of the busiest border crossing points in the world. Traffic jams are the rule. So, too, is confusion about who is Mexican and who's American or gringo.
What's your citizenship? I'm gringo. Gringo, huh? Where were you born, sir? Mexico. Do you have anything to show your American citizenship? That's it, please? Okay, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
And there's some confusion over whether Americans are people who speak English.
Ciudadano americano.
Where?
East Los Angeles.
East Los Angeles. You lived all your life in California?
Yes, ma'am.
Confusion, in fact, seems to be a natural part of the 2,000-mile-long Mexican-American border, a border that runs from the Pacific across California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas to the Gulf of Mexico. It's a border with holes in it. Holes made by people, by cars, by human hands trying to break through. If Mexicans tend to treat the border somewhat casually, well, then so does history. The Mexicans were here before there was a border. In fact, less than 140 years ago, most of the Southwest was Mexican. There are families, friends, and ties that cut right across the frontier. To head north is an almost natural instinct. And it's no wonder that a undermanned U.S. Border Patrol can't begin to cope with the problem of the Mexican migration. The Border Patrol has its work cut out for it. The patrolmen call the border the war zone, and with reason. Sophisticated sensor devices developed in Vietnam help them monitor a border that is often a dangerous place.
Still cattle. Can you see it?
Along just this section of the border, the Tijuana area, 700,000 Mexicans try to cross illegally every year, and there are only 40 border patrolmen to stop them.
Go ahead, San Diego PD. This is Border Patrol.
For information, we're responding, and Imperial Beach responding to convenience inside Borderfield Park, 1/4 mile into the park. They're taking fire there. No further details.
10-4.
Border Patrol 10-4 on claim ours.
243-827. Yeah, we have a report that the park rangers are receiving fire.
One helicopter was recently knocked down by illegal aliens throwing rocks. The 2 agents were almost killed. It's demoralizing work, just like Vietnam, trying to enforce the unenforceable.
I'll spin that way and take a look.
That's affirmative. Our unit is reported a couple of shots were fired out in Goat Canyon, about 200 yards west of Sam's Drive.
Yeah, I'm up on the strip right now. 10-4, I'll take a look.
10-4.
Okay, I got a few people in here, and I'm getting them in the uniform now. You let me know if you need anybody out there. 10-4, I've got no idea what's out there, Ron. I'm right. 10-4 at the same time. We got a couple shots from
17-1. 243 H7. Advised that the shooting is at Goat Canyon.
The Border Patrol never did catch the person who was shooting at the park rangers, but their search turned out to be worthwhile.
Okay, sir, you want to get out of your vehicle, please? Yes. You're under arrest for alien smuggling.
This man is a coyote, a smuggler of people for $200 a head. He may end up in prison. The illegal aliens, when they're caught, were simply sent back to Mexico.
One hand back there. Okay, the other hand. Okay, don't move it or get tight on you there, okay? Go there.
Sunset on the border. The main action begins. This evening, the Border Patrol has set up a surprise roadblock on the main highway just north of San Diego. It's a busy night. And sometimes, even the Border Patrol is surprised by what it finds.
Se levanten uno por uno, empezando aquí con este hombre. Empezando con este hombre entonces. Síguele uno por uno. Vamos, síguele, trabe los dedos en la nuca al bajarse.
The Mexicans come crammed in U-Haul trucks. Whole families of them.
Okay, súbete para atrás. We lost 10 out of this load. They bailed up. They're following me.
Sometimes the search is futile.
Nothing but eggs. Too bad, nothing but eggs.
Sometimes it isn't.
Everybody out. Afuera, vámonos.
The aliens are found in vans.
I got 5 over here. Okay, what do you want these? What do we got?
Sometimes in car trucks.
2 in the trunk. 2 in the trunk. Okay, there's no driver, no nothing. No driver, no nothing? Everybody's in the park. Okay. There were about 10 or 15 that jumped. Okay, total percentage.
Sometimes in campers.
Uno por uno. Vamos. Como una milla aquí.
Sometimes in the back seats of cars. The patrolmen call the illegals witnesses because they hope they'll testify against the coyotes who smuggled them in.
Leave here till we've gotten the list of the witnesses. Okay.
The surprise raid moves out to the countryside, to a canyon that's a favorite gathering place for the coyotes and the illegals they guide across.
Foxwood, you got them right down below you there? Yeah, we got them strung out all across here on this other side. And the rest are about 100 yards up there, buried in the tumbleweeds. They're running back south now if you can catch them on this other side. Running south.
We used a night scope developed in Vietnam to film the Border Patrol's roundup. Most of the illegals didn't make it this time. Like this 12-year-old boy, a walking tragedy who moves even the hard-bitten patrol.
¿Dónde están tus parientes?
Where are your parents? Over there.
Papá?
Papa? Over there also.
Allá. ¿Mamá?
Mama?
No tienes dinero.
She's dead. Do you have any money?
¿Cuánto? Sueltos nomás. That's all the money he's got. Doesn't amount to more than maybe a couple of dollars. ¿Huérfano eres?
HC7, 442, 10-8. God
damn it, kid's no older than my boy.
It'll get you, doesn't it?
Huh? My kid's 12 years old.
Get you.
The raid lasts all night. In the end, some 600 Mexican immigrants will have been arrested trying to cross the border. The Border Patrol's own rough count is that for every one caught, one gets through. But not these people with their hands up. Even the frightened babies put their hands up.
No, they just got him out of Cali.
Come on. No,
Once caught, the illegals are brought to the detention center for processing. They're questioned, searched for drugs, and prepared for the trip back south. And always, the children cry. The coyotes, the smugglers, will be formally charged with violating U.S. immigration laws. If convicted, they face a stiff fine and 5 years in prison, or both. Most get off lightly because the illegals are usually afraid to testify against them.
Not the one on the right, all the way back.
For many of the illegals, no matter how frightening, how discouraging this long night was, they'll try again. In the Mexican villages, it's said you usually make it through the border by the 4th try. So even this is worth it. For somewhere down the line, there's a job, a new life.
I think there are two options in dealing with the flow of undocumented workers in the United States. One is to try to police the border. Other is to try to police the job. I think that since the main reason for people coming here is to work, then if you make it difficult for a person to get a job who is not in the country legally, then you'll do more to stop the flow.
It is a kind of escape valve for Mexico. There's no doubt about that. And those people come here, and many of them, most of them, find jobs here. They don't come here as idlers, as loafers. They come here to work.
That's not a justification for illegal immigration.
The U.S. demand for Mexican labor has never been higher in our history than it is at the present time. And all the available evidence indicates that that demand will increase during the remainder of this century.
If we need those people in the country, then they ought to come in the country legally, with full legal rights, and they ought to have the ability to protect themselves and to enjoy all the protections of our laws.
I think the American people are rightly concerned about the population increase that could come from a massive immigration from Mexico. After all, Americans perceive themselves as having sacrificed by limiting their family sizes rather dramatically so that they could have a smaller population in the United States to leave a better world for their children. So we have very complex issues here that are going to affect all Americans. And every time you let an immigrant in, you really have to sacrifice a birth.
That's 21 counting the little kids. I'm cool.
We have to come to some place where the total of births and immigrants is kept at a level which will not cause our population to grow.
Hold back one of these. Let me see what I got.
So every time you want to show compassion to a refugee, you're going to sacrifice a birth. Every time you want to have the pleasure of one more birth, you're going to have to not have compassion for somebody who wants to come into the United States.
Before dawn, the night's catch of illegal aliens is sent back to Mexico. There, most will contact another coyote and work out a new plan. Perhaps next time they'll be luckier. Like the estimated 1 million illegals who slipped through the border last year.
Next, we'll go south of the border and examine the many reasons that push Mexicans to try and cross the border.
Sunday, it's the hilarious conclusion of the Shaggy DA with Suzanne Plachette, Vic Tayback, and Dick Van Patten. Then Punch and John face all new adventure. Chips on its new day, Sunday.
The good news I bring you is this. Your captivity is over.
Jesus of Nazareth. Judith Christ says the most satisfying screen epic on the life of Christ. Robert Powell portrays Jesus in the award-winning drama with an all-star cast. Sunday on NBC.
Sanford turns moonshiner.
You like it? Talk to me. I will as soon as I can feel my lips.
Then it's Max's birthday, but someone forgot. Sanford, then Me and Max, Saturday. Wednesday, Richard and Libby are pregnant.
Can we be sure? What if you just happen to get a sleepy rabbit who looks kind of dead?
Rabbits don't play possum.
United States at a special day and time.
Can you pick Folgers crystals? Let's see if Wina Brown can.
Take a look at these 3 spoons and tell me which is the richest looking coffee.
The one in the middle.
You chose Folgers coffee.
Oh, did I?
Describe the looks.
It looks rich and full-bodied.
But the important thing about a cup of coffee
is that it tastes good.
How does it taste?
It does taste good.
Does it taste as rich as it looks?
It really tastes as rich as it looks.
Folgers crystals tastes as rich as it looks.
It's a birthday surprise for Me and Max, Saturday at 9:30.
We're moving up. The Hispanic migration continues.
Mexico City is by far the largest city in the world, larger even than Shanghai. and has a staggering population of 16 million, plus several million squatters who live on the outskirts. It's also the most polluted city in the world, and every day, nearly 3,000 people migrate to the city. By the year 2000, if nothing is done, Mexico City's population will be at least 32 million.
Mexico's population problem is exceedingly serious. Not only is Mexico still growing very, very rapidly, but Mexico has yet really to absorb the growth of the last few decades. In Mexico, something like 46% of the people are under 15 years of age. That means the simple aging of those people from going from 0 to 15 to 15 to 30 is going to enormously increase the demand in Mexico for food, for energy, and above all for jobs. And in a country where there's already perhaps 50% of the people unemployed or underemployed, that means a real catastrophe.
7 years ago, Mexico's birth rate was the highest in the world. Since then, the government has launched a massive, ambitious family planning program. Fewer babies are born now, but the average Mexican mother still has 6 children. The birth rate may have dropped in part because 10% of the population now lives and works in the United States. The lower birth rate has come too late to make any real difference. While family planning has been somewhat successful in the cities, it is having difficulty in the rural areas, reaching the peasants and Indians. It is these people who have come to the capital to celebrate the fiesta of Our Lady of Guadalupe who have the largest family. Poverty and large families go together. For a poor farmer, children are often his only asset, a cheap source of labor and social security for old age. The Catholic Church in Mexico is opposed to abortion, but Mexico's bishops quietly ignore the Vatican's position on birth control and tacitly endorse family planning. But too many Mexicans listen neither to the church nor the government.
When he first took office, President Lopez Portillo called overpopulation Mexico's #1 problem. He has since put the weight of his office behind a massive family planning program. But no matter what happens in that field, the future is predetermined. By the year 2000, Mexico's population of 68 million will have doubled.
It is Mexico's urban squatters who are creating the most serious problems for the country. They live in shacks made out of cardboard, wood, or metal. Their settlements are called Las Ciudades Perdidas, the lost cities. They come from depressed, poor rural villages, unable to eke out a living from the arid land. They come with high hopes and expectations of finding work, only to be disappointed. There has been literally a mass migration to Mexico's cities. 2/3 of the population now lives in urban areas, and if the influx continues, 75% will crowd the cities by the year 2000. The squatters, living next to open sewers, without water or work, are like a silent army, camped at the city's gates, waiting. The gap between rich and poor is striking, and though pictures of Beverly Hills and Harlem would convey the same disparity of wealth, in Mexico, the rich are richer and the poor are more destitute. 1/3 of Mexico's population lives in homes with dirt floors. 2/3 have no plumbing. 10% of the population controls almost half of Mexico's wealth. The rich live in elegant homes, secure behind high, well-guarded walls that block out the nearby squalor. This is Mexico City's largest garbage dump, called Santa Fe. It's 1.5 miles long. The scavengers are called pependadores, which means those who pick things up. In their struggle to survive, they sift through the smoldering rubble for bones, paper, glass, anything they can sell for recycling. This wretched work, which pays more than the daily minimum wage of $6.25, is highly coveted. The jobs at the garbage dump are handed down from generation to generation. They consider themselves lucky to have work in a country where half the labor force is unemployed or underemployed. A country which will have to create almost 1 million jobs a year just to keep up with population growth. And a country where 100,000 children die each year from malnutrition. Mexico's Indians were the first people in the world to grow corn, but now there's not enough to go around. Mexico must import corn from the United States. Most of the corn from this harvest in Iowa went to Mexico, partly because of drought, but mostly because of overpopulation. Mexico will import 7 million tons of grain from the United States this year. More than $1 billion worth. Mexico is now a net food importer. And like Iran and Venezuela, that food is paid for by revenues from oil. Politicians are worried about paying for corn tortillas with oil income. The political implications of importing so much food are serious. There is a shortage of sugar, milk, salt, eggs, and meat. And the high cost of food has triggered several anti-government demonstrations. In terms of trade, Mexico is overwhelmingly dependent on its northern neighbor. 70% of its exports go to the U.S., and 60% of its imports come from America. The Yankee influence is everywhere. The mystique of American prosperity is like a magnet. That mystique pulls 1,000 people a day to the American embassy in Mexico City to apply for visas. Most of these people are applying for non-immigrant visas to visit the U.S. as tourists or students or on business. The U.S. Embassy in Mexico City has on its books a backlog of 200,000 Mexicans who have applied for permanent residence visas for the United States. Most don't get them because the immigration quota from Mexico is only 20,000 a year. Doing it the legal way doesn't work. So out of frustration, many come in illegally or apply for tourist visas with more than tourism on their minds. Last year, nearly 2 million Mexicans visited the United States on visas. It's known that many of them overstayed those visas and remained north of the border. The push factors are everywhere in Mexico. The Valley of Morelos is 100 miles south of Mexico City. The climate is one of the most perfect in the world, a perpetual spring. But despite the beauty of the land and the climate and the fertility of the soil, the push to go north, to move up, is as great here as it is anywhere in Mexico. The landless peasants or poor farmers who cannot make a living from their small plots of land have become a symbol of Mexico's economic problems. Their squatters' shacks literally surround the city of Cuernavaca, where they've come for work. It's called moving up. And cities like Cuernavaca are often merely a stopping-off point on the way north to America. This man is building a new house with money earned as an illegal worker in the U.S. What are you building? I'm making a new house for my wife and children, a bigger house. The one I'm living in now is not very durable. You can see it's falling apart. Where did you get the money to build this new house? I went to the United States to work. I worked in Fresno, California. I was picking grapes and peaches in the groves. I also picked oranges and tomatoes. How much were you paid? I was paid 35 cents for a bushel of oranges. For the peaches, we were paid 40 cents a bushel. And they paid us about 5 cents for a pail of tomatoes. How did you cross the border? With a coyote. A coyote took me across to San Diego. I paid him $80. That was just across the border. It was difficult because the Immigration Service concentrates its efforts there. Then to find work, another coyote took us north to Selma for $150. I stayed there about 4 months. Do you plan to go back to the U.S.? Yes, I want furniture for my house and a colored TV set, God willing. Moving up. That's what these hillside squatters are trying to do. They've migrated to Morelos from the desperately poor state of Guerrero. The father of this family, with 11 children, came to the valley 35 years ago in search of work and a piece of land. At that time, he earned 4 pesos a day, equivalent to about 50 cents. Today, he earns $4 a day as a night watchman at a dynamite dump above his shack. He's still supporting 9 of his children. Despite the family's poverty, there is hope because of a special tie to the United States. Because of this son, we'll call him Juan.
This is where Juan learned a skill, the Datsun assembly plant in Cuernavaca. The son was accepted in the apprentice training program here. He learned welding and machining metal parts. The plant employs 2,800 workers and trains many of them as skilled technicians and specialists. These workers earn between $8 and $9 a day. Juan found a way to make between $8 and $9 an hour. The son of that family in Morelos is now an illegal immigrant in the United States. Although he's here illegally, he works at this inland steel plant in East Chicago and is a dues-paying member of Local 1010 of the United Steelworkers Union. He still doesn't speak any English, but that doesn't stop him from making about $20,000 a year as a machinist, using skills he acquired in Mexico. Juan asked NBC News not to reveal his name. He's afraid that if the U.S. immigration authorities found out about him and his false papers, he'd be deported.
¿Qué clase de trabajo tiene más o menos?
What kind of work do you do?
trabajo se le llama aprendiz de millwright.
I'm a millwright apprentice. It's a job that requires a certain amount of skill, mechanical skill. I also do some soldering and work as a mechanic and electrician at times. At work, they give the best jobs to others and not to the Mexican. They give the difficult jobs to the Mexicans because they never stop working. They came here hungry with a great need for work. They give them the jobs nobody else wants. How much do you make an hour? Around $8 an hour. This new phenomenon, skilled workers coming to the U.S., is a severe problem for the Mexican government. The president of Mexico, López Portillo.
Es evidente, no solo de trabajo.
It's not only an issue of work, but of work that's very well paid. The phenomenon is very curious. It's no longer simply minimum work that our people are going and seeking. Many people, and many of our skilled workers, who have received their training and their qualifications here in Mexico, are going off to the United States, creating a problem that's very serious for us, because there they receive better pay. Thus, it's a very complex problem that has yet to be studied. Inland Steel Company, East Chicago, Indiana, is the nation's 6th largest steel producer. Inland has 19,000 employees who are members of the United Steelworkers Union. 1/4 of them are Hispanic, most of them born in the U.S. Arthur Gonzalez is a second-generation Mexican-American, one of the 5,000 Hispanics at Inland Steel. He earns $23,000 a year as an assistant pipe fitter. He's moving into mainstream America, and he plans to move up.
I try to put $400 away a month, which means that comes out to about $4,000, $5,000 a year. I'm getting a degree in business management. I feel that's the only way I would be able to make anything out of the way I'm living right now. I would have to advance myself educationally to get a better job, a job that pays better.
While working at the steel mill, Arthur has been going to college at night and needs 25 credits for his degree. He's 24 and is already better off than most Hispanics, whose income averages 1/3 below most Americans.
The neighborhood we live in right now is more or less a Spanish neighborhood. I live at home because I like being with my parents. They just bought the house, so I'm helping them out with the house payment because my father's going to retire.
En el nombre de nuestro Señor Jesucristo te pedimos todo esto, Padre Santo. Bondadoso Señor y eterno Padre Santo,
our family is very close-knit.
por estos momentos,
my father
este día,
is
para
the master of the household.
en busca
It's his
de la
house.
verdad. Amén.
We have to stay within his bounds.
Okay, ahora sí,
My parents, they're sort of like old-fashioned. They prefer to make sure that we don't lose what we inherit from them, like all the Spanish that we learned from them, the customs, and the way of life.
Arthur's father came here from Mexico in 1952, raised 7 children, and worked his way up the ladder in the steel industry. He makes $32,000 a year as a steel roller at Inland. It's enough to help all of his children go to college, an opportunity he never had.
My father enjoys seeing us decide to go to college. Everybody so far has decided to go back to college or is going to college now. He gets a big thrill about that because he's giving his children something that he couldn't get because he was working and barely making it and didn't know the language either. I think my father's glad that he came up here to live and not stay down in Mexico because in Mexico it would have been a lot harder. As far as up here, it was hard, but he learned and he made it.
extra money in Arthur's pockets allows him to pursue the American dream, while at the same time preserving his Hispanic culture.
On my days off, I more than likely will go out dancing, partying, drinking. I don't plan on being married now or getting married in the near future because I like the way I live. I plan to be financially secure by 34 or 35. Between then and now, I want to do some investing and try to get some capital so I can do some heavy investing. I plan on buying stocks, bonds, gold, and plan to maybe start my own business, a bar or a disco or something like that.
Tell about Hawaii. Tell about Hawaii.
Oh, no, I'm not going to Hawaii, man.
You're not going to Hawaii?
No. I ran out of cash, man, with that accident and then that $1,400 bill, insurance bill coming up. Hey, I can't handle it.
You're going to miss.
Arthur's hometown, East Chicago, Indiana, has a population of 48,000. It is 1/3 Hispanic, evidence of the new migration to the Midwest, to the industrial heartland where the jobs are. Milwaukee, Detroit, Minneapolis, Kansas City. Hispanics are converging on Middle America, and sometimes their new presence causes subtle forms of discrimination. At the Unión Benéfica Mexicana, a local fraternal club of Mexican Americans, the subject of discrimination and prejudice against Hispanics often comes up in conversation at the bar.
Anything that any Latino in this country, if you want to be successful, you have to work hard.
That goes for any people, though. Regardless, it goes for any people, for any person.
Okay, you tell me that the Latino don't have to go be a little bit more educated or a little bit more experienced than the widow before he gets the opportunity to get the job. I'm not saying that a Latino can't achieve what somebody else gets. What I'm saying is that he has to work a little harder to be accepted.
And we also, our names got a lot of things to do with it. We've been harassed by the immigration also. They stop you, they ask you a question, they won't let you go about your business. Because you look like Mexican, here, come here. They stop you any place.
Let me tell you, I was working in the mill. I was working 3 to 11 in the mill. And you know these industrial cleaners that come in the mill and work out, right? Okay, here come immigration. They come with the big paddy wagon. All these industrial cleaners are supposed to be wetbacks. All right, so they haul off a bunch of industrial cleaners into the van. Then they get on the PA system and they say, okay, all you Mexicans that are in this mess, you better have your green cards or you're going back to Mexico. Now, what kind is that?
That's no way.
Did they actually say that? Yeah. And,
sure.
and they said, everybody who don't have a green card is going back to Mexico.
Despite discrimination, no one at the club complains about being American. They know what life is like south of the border.
Why did they all come over here?
Mexico is trying desperately to solve its many problems. Coming up, a look at the Mexican effort.
A herd of deer can seriously stunt the growth of young trees. When the trees are small, every bite cuts down on the raw material for the next century. A bite of lumber, a gulp of plywood, tomorrow's paper supply. Dr. Ilo Gaddets, Weyerhaeuser scientist working with Dr. Katashi Oida, developed a way to discourage the deer. It took 8 years of experimenting, and finally the answer came. An egg derivative. Dr. Gaddets found that deer hate eggs, poached, scrambled, or soft-boiled. Now she works with Weyerhaeuser foresters like Ed Baker. Together, they decide when a young forest might be in danger, and they take steps to protect the young seedlings. Then the deer move to older trees where their pruning doesn't really harm the trees. A way to save wood resources without harming the Bambis of the world. Weyerhaeuser, the tree-growing company.
We're moving up. The Hispanic migration continues.
Mexico's winter vegetable crop provides work for 250,000 people who might otherwise be forced to cross the border. And it provides the American consumer with good, inexpensive vegetables. That makes everyone happy. Everyone but the tomato growers in Florida and the people who represent them in Congress. They're suing to stop the flow of Mexican tomatoes, saying the Mexicans are dumping the tomatoes at low prices thanks to cheap labor.
All right, we got sold out on account of oil and gas. It's not only oil, but our government at this time is so hungry for good relations with anybody in the world that they will give up anything to try to buy these good relations.
The Carter administration has several reasons to back the import of Mexican winter vegetables. Cheaper produce helps fight inflation. The trade ties bolster relations with Mexico and make talks on oil and gas easier. And the jobs that market creates reduces the number of Mexicans who try to slip across the border. So it's trying to get the Florida growers to back down.
Tens of thousands of jobs in Mexico depend upon the sale of tomatoes to the USA. And tomatoes are grown almost entirely for the U.S. market. If we put barriers up to the importation of Mexican tomatoes, it will not only cause vast unemployment, but very great misunderstanding.
That misunderstanding would almost certainly manifest itself over the issue of how much, if any, oil and gas Mexico sells the U.S. The real reason the fences along the border are not higher, stronger, and better patrolled, the real reason Washington fights trade restrictions can be summed up in one word: oil. Mexico has recently discovered vast reserves of oil and natural gas, proven reserves of 50 billion barrels. That puts Mexico in the big league of oil, on a par with many OPEC nations. Oil has given Mexico new pride and confidence. It's beginning to feel, as a nation, that for the first time in its history, it can deal with the U.S. as an equal. But there is also fear, a deep-seated, centuries-old fear of the unpredictable giant of the North.
I think that there are a significant number of people in Mexico who are actually afraid that the USA will come in and, for example, take oil if it's necessary, or take some land and so forth. To me, that's utterly preposterous. There's not a chance under the sun that we would do that. But one sees it in Mexican newspapers, one sees it from rather high officials.
Yes,
this very notion.
Didn't Lopez Portillo himself say fairly recently that we cannot know what some big powers might do to secure their oil supplies?
Yes, he did. And I suppose it's a reasonable assumption that we might be one of those big powers.
Decades ago, a Mexican president said, "Poor Mexico, so far from God and so close to the United States." Many Mexicans still feel the same way today because of history, a history that has often complicated and soured Mexican-American relations. This monument is one of the most revered in Mexico and a reminder of that history. It is dedicated to the 6 young Mexican military cadets who jumped to their deaths in the walls of Chapultepec Castle rather than surrender to American troops in 1847. Chapultepec was the last battle of the Mexican-American War. Mexican opposition was crushed. As the American flag went up over Chapultepec, a Mexican officer muttered, "God is a Yankee." General Winfield Scott entered Mexico City 2 weeks later. A battalion of U.S. Marines, following in the footsteps of that earlier conquistador, Cortez, stood guard over the halls of Montezuma. Mexico did not just lose a war. It lost land, 1 million square miles of it, covering the Texas that had been lost a few years earlier, plus California, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and parts of Oregon, Colorado, and Wyoming. Mexicans then, and now, considered the war one of the most spectacular and successful acts of theft in history. At the time, so did many Americans, like Abraham Lincoln, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Horace Greeley, and Henry Thoreau. The Mexican-American War was every bit as divisive for the U.S. as Vietnam. The Massachusetts state legislature summed up the opposition's point of view. It passed a resolution that called the war an act against freedom, against humanity, against justice, against the Union. The Mexican Revolution started in 1910 and lasted 11 years. It was as savage and tragic as it was colorful and heroic, and it led inevitably to more conflicts with the giant of the North. Trouble on the border became a way of life. In 1916, during the Mexican Revolution, President Woodrow Wilson sent General Pershing and 10,000 troops across the border to catch Pancho Villa, who had taken to raiding American border towns. Pershing never caught Villa, but Mexico's distrust of Americans and its determination to rid the country of foreign influence became an article of faith of the revolution. In what was really the last act of the revolution, the Mexican government decided to nationalize the foreign-owned oil companies.
Mexico pours troubled oil on troubled days. The government expropriates all British and United States oil plants. The peso tumbles. The United States stops buying Mexican silver. There is a shortage of gasoline. But still Mexicans celebrate. President Cardenas tells his nation that the country's 18,000 oil workers now have their rights, and that Mexico expects to pay foreign oil companies full value for their confiscated properties. The Americans and English, however, pin their hope on diplomatic negotiations.
Diplomatic negotiations did not work. Neither did threats. Mexico, in part thanks to President Roosevelt's good neighbor policy, made the nationalization of oil stick. Over the years, the National Oil Company, Pemex, grew from the equivalent of a neighborhood store to Mexico's biggest business. But despite all the wealth oil creates, it does not create, by itself, many jobs. It is the money from oil which, if well and honestly used, that creates jobs.
The Mexican government itself has to find ways to create jobs, and fundamentally that means not taking the new oil wealth and making the small proportion of Mexicans who are already rich filthy rich. It means using that money to create jobs in Mexico. Lopez Portillo, I think, is well aware of this need, and it's just a question of whether he can clean up the corruption and get the job done.
Nuestra posición ha sido muy clara, muy firme.
Our position has been very clear and very firm, and we are conscious of the fact that the solution to this problem, to a large extent, lies in Mexico, and that when Mexico creates sufficient, well-paying jobs, the migratory flow will be reduced substantially. Monterrey, 150 miles south of the border, Mexico's richest and most industrialized city, is the testing ground of Mexico's future. In Monterrey, Mexico may discover whether it can use its oil wealth to industrialize, to provide its people with jobs and a better life, and keep more of its people south of the border and away from the prospect of yet another revolution. The government is using oil revenue to give private industry tax breaks and almost free energy. It is all part of a very hopeful vision of the future, a vision that sees Mexico becoming another Japan. The ultimate goal is to create jobs, those 1 million jobs a year that are needed to end unemployment. This is why it has to succeed. For Monterrey, like every Mexican city, is surrounded by those hundreds of thousands of squatters, that army of the poor engaged in economic siege warfare. President Ulysses S. Grant was a young army officer during the war with Mexico 142 years ago. He wrote this home to his fiancée about Mexico and its people. With a soil and climate scarcely equaled, she has more poor and starving subjects who are willing to work than any country in the world. The rich keep down the poor with a hardness of heart that is incredible. There are those who would argue that not much has changed. It is hard to see how the industrialization program will be realized fast enough to help these people, unskilled farmers without land, illiterates who are willing to do any job they can find, but they usually can't find any jobs. The industry, the wealth, the future that is Monterrey's is within sight, but totally out of their reach. They live lives of quiet desperation and breed a new generation, an even more populous one for the same mean existence. And the worse it gets, the more they dream about what life must be like north of the border, or they dream about revolution.
Tierra y Libertad, land and liberty, was the cry of Emiliano Zapata back in 1910 when he rallied the peasants against the landowners. That same cry was heard here just a few years ago when several hundred university students tried to organize the poor and the jobless. They formed a Marxist colony and took over 60 acres of land. They called it Tierra y Libertad.
The Mexican flag is raised every morning over this Marxist colony. And the children pledge allegiance to a revolutionary Mexico. There are several communist colonies in Mexico, but this one in Monterrey, Tierra y Libertad, is the largest and most successful. The philosophy of the colony is based on the teachings of Marx and Lenin, and it's committed to a new Mexican revolution. Revolutionary communism is getting a tryout just across the border. The colony is 7 years old now and home for more than 2,000 families, 15,000 people, all dedicated to radical change. This is the first time a television crew has been allowed in to see how they live.
Bueno, compañeros, compañeras de aquí de Tierra de Libertad.
The colonists are connected with each other by a PA system that announces daily activities, like the formation of special work brigades. This one, for example. These colonists are here to encourage their local electricians replacing a worn-out transformer. 2 men who tried the form were electrocuted. Electricity at Tierra is free. People steal it. Assembly meetings are held each week, and the colonists are encouraged to attend. Most of them do not have steady work. Employers in Monterrey shy away from job seekers who list Tierra as their address. Justo Flores is president of the assembly. He's a bitter man, bitter over the treatment of the poor in Mexico. This kind of struggle springs up against need, against the hunger that all of us poor people suffer. Our government is not helping the peasants, the humble people. All we have left are promises. Another revolution can occur here because it is needed. If we are united, we will win. If we are scattered, the enemy will divide us. The colony has a small health clinic that people run themselves using medical supplies subsidized by the government. Like the government, the colonists say children are the future. Unlike the government, the colonists are opposed to birth control. Because they say, the more people there are, the quicker the revolution will come.
A ver, niños, ¿quién puede contestar?
Education at Tierra is compulsory, and if the traditional ABCs are important, equally important are the ABCs of communist history and the thoughts of Marx and Lenin.
El Partido Comunista Lenin fue.
If the government continues to ignore the very real claims of poor people, those kinds of movements can only spread. There is a tremendous potential in Mexico for social and political unrest. And in a kind of nightmare scenario, if there's real political violence in Mexico, not only do we get lots and lots of political refugees along with the economic immigrants that we now have, but the United States essentially becomes, potentially anyway, a safe haven from which dissident Mexicans attack back across the border into Mexico.
The lessons these children learn at Tierra y Libertad could have a profound impact on the futures of both Mexico and the United States. The children of Mexico are a problem in another way. There are far too many of them. Mexico's 5th largest city is just across the Rio Grande from El Paso, Texas. It has the same problem of every Mexican city. A population boom fueled by poor farmers and their families who've given up the land to look for jobs in a town already crammed with the unemployed. And there are the women and their children. Far too many children for the Mexican economy to absorb. A mile and a half and several centuries away from downtown El Paso lives Urbana Hinojosa. She had 15 children, and one of her daughters had 12 before anyone told them there was a way to stop having babies. Her husband has no job. She does. She makes 87 cents a day doing laundry. It's not hard to find women like Urbana in Juarez. In a sense, Urbana is everywhere. Lucia Moreno. She had triplets when she was 14. She's 37 now and pregnant with her 10th child. Socorro Reina is also 37. Her husband can't find a job and she's pregnant with her 9th child. Brigida de Lozano is the mother of 10. Her husband can't find work either. He did try to cross the Rio Grande, but the U.S. Border Patrol caught him and sent him back. Petra Cisneros gave birth to 13 children, but she couldn't feed them all. 6 of them died. Rosa Samarone is 19. Her husband just died, and she's pregnant with her 4th child. This is where the push to go north begins. Lupe de la Vega, the wife of a wealthy businessman, is obsessed by the Rosas and the Brigidas. She talked her husband into investing in a private birth control program 6 years ago. It's starting to work, and now the Mexican government helps support it. This clinic is one of 3 in the Juarez program, and it's crowded with women who need help. And when it's too late for them, they bring their daughters. At the clinic, women are able to give birth under decent conditions, and at the same time, learn how to limit the size of their families. But for many, help comes too late. These 2 women, between them, are the mothers of 29 children. If the same rate of fertility continues in the next generation, they would be grandmothers of 433 children. The first time either of them heard about birth control was 3 months ago.
I think it's not their fault. It's our fault that we have not been able to take all this information to them. Because if we have all this information, we have the responsibility to share it with some other women that are not so lucky as we are.
Buenos días, mi promotor 83. ¿Qué pasó? Buenos días, ¿cómo estás?
Evangelina, one of the leaders of the program, works the barrios. Her car is her office, and her storeroom for the contraceptives these women will pass on. She wants to enlist as many women as she can as volunteers to get them involved, to change their role and their image of themselves as machines for making babies.
Muy bien, me parece magnífico tu trabajo, muy bien.
Otro cambio sería...
And there are the schools, already flooded with too many children who may in turn have too many children and be forced to flee to the United States in search of survival. This too is part of the program, teaching the children about birth control.
¿Cómo? Ovarios. Se les conoce como ovarios.
Inevitably, not all of them will pass the test with flying colors. Inevitably, many will head north.
This is a very unfortunate situation. They are looking at all of these good things in the other side of the border. How can you blame them for trying to get what they do not have?
Lupe and her volunteers are fighting against time. They're trying to prevent more Mexican tragedies, like the one that happened to Roberto Gomez. He is 17, one of 9 children in a family without a father. To help out, he headed north looking for work. He heard they needed gardeners in Houston, so he hitched an illegal ride on a freight train. Just outside El Paso, he slipped and fell between the cars. His legs had to be amputated. A program worker brings him the books he asked for so he can study and improve himself. And perhaps someday earn enough money to buy artificial legs. He has to at least try to improve himself. As the man of the household now, he has to at least try to prevent his sisters and brothers from making that same journey north.
Those who do make it north to cities like Chicago become part of a new political force. That in a moment.
Planet Earth. Year 2030. What will it be like? Smaller and far more crowded. World population will reach 8 billion, and people in the year 2030 will expect more. More freedom, more security, more and better housing. In America alone, demand for energy will be 3 times greater. Shortages of raw materials will be commonplace. Oil, gas, and many crucial metals will be approaching depletion. In fact, there will be less of virtually all natural resources except wood, if we do the right things, because trees are renewable. North America is one of the 2 areas in the world with an abundance of softwood timber. Siberia is the other. And properly managed, America's great forest lands can become even more productive. This is the essence of Weyerhaeuser high-yield forestry, growing twice as much wood on the same land. In the South, in areas that were once tangled underbrush, Weyerhaeuser has created new forests. From North Carolina to Oklahoma, we're now growing our third crop of loblolly pine. Trees that mature in just 25 years. Weyerhaeuser high-yield forestry is also at work on tree farms in the Pacific Northwest. In fact, everywhere you turn at Weyerhaeuser, on nearly 6 million acres around the United States, you'll find prolific and productive forest. Trees grown in endless cycles. Year after year, generation after generation. And so the future of the American forest can be very bright indeed. Paper for books, pulp for packaging, lumber and plywood for your grandchildren's homes, and chemicals by the hundreds. In the laboratory, wood chips have already been turned into oil. And by the year 2000, wood may help serve again as energy for homes and machines. In America alone, the demand for wood will surely double within 50 years. And world demand will be far greater. Thus, the productivity of the forest may well become a key factor in keeping America economically strong. Renewable American wood in exchange for foreign non-renewable raw materials like oil and bauxite. Given the will, America has the means and the technology to become the wood basket of the world. And the forests of the future will not only provide housing for generations yet unborn, they will also continue to provide shelter for other living things. This is the promise of the once and future forests of America. Managing the land so that it does indeed become an inexhaustible storehouse to meet America's and the world's need for wood and wood fiber. Good news for a resource-short world. From Weyerhaeuser, the tree-growing company.
We're moving up. The Hispanic migration continues.
Hispanics who do go north and migrate to cities like Chicago traditionally have kept a low political profile. But that's changing, and the spur for change was concern about their children's education. And in the process, they learned how to make the American political system work. For 5 years, they fought for a school adapted to their children's needs, a bilingual school.
What's going to happen to the body temperature?
Va a subir.
Va a subir. How do you say va a subir? It goes up.
The Benito Juarez High School is the result. Its enrollment is over 90% Mexican-American.
Okay. This is labeled. Está señalado.
When I graduated from high school, the dropout rate was approaching 89%. I think that has dropped considerably, but it's still in the 60% range. And I think that's appalling. I think that, there's a lot of things that have to be done. And they have to be done at all levels, not only the national level, but at the local level.
Who knows what this means?
Something has been done in Chicago. Last year, the Benito Juarez School said goodbye to its first graduating class. Nearly 1/3 of the students went on to college. The assimilation process has begun.
Es como una adivinanza educada. An educated guess.
The struggle that led to the foundation of the Benito Juarez School proved to the Hispanics of Chicago that they did have political clout. Clout that could be used to better the lives of their children. The decade of the 80s will see that clout take on a national form. At the moment, there are only 5 Hispanic American congressmen in office, but change appears to be just around the corner.
I believe Hispanics are turning the circle. I believe we're coming around. I believe for the first time, for too long, we have heard Hispanics, whether they be Cubans, Puerto Ricans, or Mexicans, looking at each other with distrust. We're looking at each other right now in each other's eye, and we're saying to each other, we're in this together.
Organization is one of the ways that we have to get to you know, the seats of power, whether they be in business or government or whatever. That organization is now, if you look around, you'll see that there is organizations of Hispanics, national organizations of Hispanics growing.
When you consider the percentage of the population that we comprise in important electoral states such as New York, Illinois, Texas, and California, that is the national ballgame we're talking about, not just a regional ballgame.
I don't want to scare America by saying that, hey, there's a whole new group of us here, look out. Historically, this country has always been very suspicious of any new group that has come in. The point is that this country historically has always taken advantage of the new kid on the block, so to speak. And all I can say is that as far as we're concerned, is all we want to do is participate and to walk alongside.
Hola, soy Frank Crow de Los Angeles Rams.
The 1980 census represents the main chance for Hispanic America, the chance to show it has the numbers no politician or major corporation can ignore.
Estamos contigo, Chichi. Seguro que sí. Soy Chichi Rodríguez y yo contaré.
But all Hispanics may not seize that chance. Although illegal aliens are being told that the census is confidential, that the U.S. immigration authorities will never learn their name or address, most probably don't believe it. So there will inevitably be another undercount of Hispanics, and the Census Bureau will just have to make an educated guess.
The 1980 census is important to Hispanics for the following reasons. Number one, we have never been counted accurately. The census of 1980, for the first time, has a question that asks very specifically, are you of Hispanic origin? The demographers in this country, the federal agencies in this country, the legislatures of this country, which all have a direct access to the figures and statistics that are provided by the census, all for the first time after this census is completed, are going to see that there is a large Hispanic community, which will mean increased political representation, which will mean increased federal reimbursement of funds for programs that are essential to our community. All of these are vital.
What are the implications for America? Good news for Democrats and bad news for Republicans because Hispanics tend to vote Democrat. White Anglo-Saxon Protestants may become the new minority. Hispanics are mostly Catholic and have the nation's highest birth rate. As Hispanics move into the political system, they may constitute a powerful lobby for Puerto Rican statehood and more understanding and flexibility in U.S. foreign policy towards Mexico and all Latin America. There will be a lot more Spanish heard on the streets, and bilingualism may replace busing as the major controversy in education. But for most Hispanics, the struggle to survive, to move up economically, is far more important than politics. In Chicago, Father Jose Gallego goes on his rounds, visiting members of his congregation who need encouragement. Not just illegal immigrants, families here legally also have problems. Like the Costillas, a family of 11 getting by on $190 a week.
The Hispanic family traditionally is a very close-knit family. And no matter what happens, they will stick together. Blood is very thick with them, very thick.
So are you the one who was working somewhere?
Yes, restaurant. I'm a waiter there.
You're a waiter there?
Yes.
And you're saving money for what?
To buy a house.
You're saving money to buy a house. Yes. And you're only, what, 16 years old?
15.
You're 15 now.
Yes.
And you saved a good amount of money, and your dad is very proud of you. To buy a house for the entire family. Yes. That's great.
A big house.
A big house besides? Well,
yes.
Well, how many are in the family?
11.
That's 9 and 2, 11.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, we're all proud of you. What do you want to be? Your sister says she wants to be a nurse. Okay, what about you?
A police.
A policewoman. And what are you going to be when you grow up?
Fireman.
You're going to be a fireman. Oh, we have a whole collection in this house here, huh? Now a fireman.
Like the immigrants who came to Chicago before them, the Poles, the Irish, the Jews, the Italians, this family is moving up.
And what are you studying for? What do you want to be when you grow up?
An artist.
You want to be an artist? What type of an artist?
Drawing.
Drawing? Oh, cartoonist. How about that? Now, how about this rascal here? Well, you better tell me your name.
Ray.
Ray? Yeah? What are you going to be when you grow up?
A Please.
A policeman? Oh, we need that, you know. I need a bodyguard. Your brother wants to be a psychologist or psychiatrist?
Psychologist.
Psychologist? Okay. Your sister wants to be a nurse. You're going to be an engineer. We have some policemen around here. Eh? Policewoman and a policeman.
Yes.
Boy, we are aiming high. These are the families that we encounter constantly. They are hardworking families. They are ambitious families. These are the type of immigrants who actually are the future of our country.
Part of that future is still here. On the border, looking north, looking at a better life. There are more immigrants on the way, pressing up against the border, wanting to be part of that future. There are actually two borders, and both are problems that will have to be solved in this decade. There is this, the real border, the hard physical reality. That strips Mexicans of their dignity and Americans of their ideals. It will have to bend to the new reality that now the U.S. needs Mexico, its oil, its products, and its people, just as much as Mexico needs the U.S. It will have to become a border of dignity on both sides. Up north, there's another kind of border, a border that separates Hispanic Americans from the rest of their fellow citizens. Chances are that border won't just bend. Chances are the force of Hispanic America will erase it entirely. I'm Bill McLaughlin, NBC News.
This NBC White Paper was brought to you by Weyerhaeuser, producers of products made from America's renewable resource, trees. Another Weyerhaeuser series you'll find interesting is Bill Moyer's Journal. See your newspaper for day and times. Weyerhaeuser, the tree-growing company.
Entre cerros y montañas está el pueblo en que nací. Los recuerdos de mañanas tan felices que viví. Tepoztlán, esa es mi tierra, pueblecito encantador. Con tus ruinas y leyendas me hablas de tu tradición. Son perennes cancioneros de mi tierra Tepoztlán.
Saturday. Say hello to Sister Sledge, BJ. And hello trouble when BJ and a lady cop tangle with a deadly cocaine smuggling ring. Then Sanford turns moonshiner.
You like it? Talk to me.
I will as soon as I can feel my lips. In a get-rich-quicker with liquor scheme. And it's Max's birthday and she's expecting her mother.
She told me she'd be there.
Can an inexperienced dad make up for a missing mom? On Me and Max. Saturday, it's BJ and the Bear, then Sanford, followed by Me and Max.
NBC News produced this program and is responsible for its content.
See the tour's finest players in the Women's Kemper Open tomorrow.
Coming up at News Center 4, the latest in the transit talks, just a weekend away from the strike now.
The memory of 3 Mile Island triggers protests on the first anniversary of that nuclear accident.
And in New York tonight, a 3D movie festival. Remember them? News Center 4 is next.
When is the last time you had your eyes examined? If it's more than a year ago, don't put it off much longer. Because an eye exam not only tells you if your prescription has changed, it also helps screen for glaucoma, one of the leading causes of blindness. At Pearl Vision Center, we'll give you a thorough eye exam with the latest professional equipment. After all, even though we sell eyeglasses, this is one pair we hate to sell. Pearl Vision Center, the value center for eye care.
No matter how crowded an airport gets, people shouldn't be treated like cattle. So although Eastern Airlines is investing millions in new equipment as traffic grows, we won't let service get lost in the shuffle. Sure, computers do a great job with names and numbers, but it takes someone like Pam Roger to make people feel like people. If you like people, you'll love New York. Eastern takes care of about 5 million travelers a year here. For many of them, their first contact with us is BT Times. We've just added a $500,000 baggage system to help him out, but it can never do the job he does. This is our biggest new investment of all, the A300. It's quiet, fuel efficient, spacious, the plane of the future. But if our crew doesn't make you feel comfortable, it won't matter what plane you're flying. I fly Eastern, but you don't have to. So it's up to all of us at Eastern. We have to earn our wings every day.
Sanford tries to get rich quick with moonshine, Saturday at 9.
From WNBC Television, this is News Center 4.
Good evening, I'm Sue Simmons.
And I'm Chuck Scarborough. The big question everybody's asking as the work week ends is how are you getting to work next week if there's a transit strike at midnight on Monday? It's a problem for millions of people. They may have to deal with it. The transit union's defying a court order not to walk off the job. Now, Jim Ryan found out MTA boss Richard Ravitch is not optimistic about a settlement.
To be candid, I'm, if anything, a little gloomier than I was yesterday, because 24 hours have passed without any real recognition, apparent recognition on the union's part of the seriousness of our determination.
And that was before MTA Chairman Richard Ravitch was served with court papers by the union. Those papers charged him with unfair labor practices. The union court move followed one by the MTA. In the morning, the authority obtained a temporary restraining order against a transit strike on Tuesday. Nevertheless, the union went ahead with strike preparations, and President John Law of TWU Local 100 said what he thought of the restraining order.
We cannot be deterred by a restraining order. We have a job to do for our people, and we intend to do it.
In other activity on the transportation front today, the leaders of 7 unions that have yet to sign contracts with the Long Island Railroad met with MTA brass. This is Teamster official John Mahoney following that meeting.
However, if they don't move, Local 808 will be on strike April 1. 1 minute after midnight, we'll shut the railroad down.
There's reason for gloom in the transit picture tonight. There are only 3 days to go before the strike deadline, and both sides are tossing court papers at each other, and they have still not gotten around to the central issue in the dispute, money. Jim Ryan, News Center 4.
Obviously, if the buses and the subways plus the Long Island Railroad stop running, it will add up to chaos.
Chuck, preparations are being made to make it easier for some folks to travel. Parking spots will be set aside for 5,000 cars in the New Jersey Meadowlands. Carpooling may be the most sensible solution. If the Long Island Railroad is struck, railroad parking lots with 36,000 spaces will also be made available for carpool staging areas. In Westchester, parking space where people in carpools can rendezvous will also be allocated. There was also talk of a taxi strike on April 1st if drivers did not get higher fares. Now they will get those increases, but they're lower than those accepted by the Taxi and Limousine Commission last month. Those hikes were canceled after so many people griped. A 3-mile ride now costs $2.90. It would have been $3.80 under the earlier plan. And under the new plan, the cost will be $3.60. Now, if there's a transit strike, the new fares won't begin until 48 hours after the strike ends. The Commission doesn't want to add to the travel's burden during the strike by raising the fares.
A year ago today, millions of people got the scare of their lives. It is the anniversary of that nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania. Nobody was hurt, but today more than 100 opponents of nuclear power gathered in Middletown, Pennsylvania, near the crippled reactor. The vigil started at 4 in the morning, the time the first alarm sounded at 3 Mile Island. In New York City, another peaceful vigil began at 6 o'clock tonight, and Roberto Chudin-Lushim was there.
For a vigil, it was pretty noisy. About 300 demonstrators gathered across the street from the Con Ed headquarters in Manhattan. Some were young, some were old, but they were united in their distaste for nuclear power, particularly at Indian Point.